Good morning. Today's Wednesday. I didn't do a chatting yesterday as I was overwhelmed with all my other things. But I'm here today, this morning. We'll see if anybody decides to join. I hope that, well, it didn't appear that anybody else was doing one that would conflict. But we shall soon find out if somebody else has something that's conflict. Feel free to let me know in the comments. Sometimes Grim goes on, but I think he's doing something different when he goes on at this time slot. And also, I'm only available till noon today. Actually, probably a little bit before noon, because I have a Zoom meeting at noon. Let's see if there's any music I want to play. Before I started, I was listening to my Pandora station. I've been in this 90s music kick for a while. It makes me feel like I'm reliving my childhood. We keep it rocking. I see a few people watching. Anyone interested in jumping in? Maybe you're just enjoying listening to Dre and Tupac. Sounds good. Sounds good. We'll see if people are still around at that time. Although, past couple of days, people have been. Or, I didn't see anybody yesterday, but the day before it went on for quite a long time. Yeah, 5-hour streams are cool to jump in and out of. I don't always have that much time on my hands. But I mean, the goal eventually for something like this is that there would kind of always be something going. So at any time of day, when anybody's in, again, kind of like an online virtual cafe, people can jump in, or virtual pub. I like cafe sounds a little bit too bougie for me, but like a virtual pub, you can kind of come in and talk with whoever's there, or just people watch. I've always enjoyed people watching. The first time I went to Europe when I was in college, I was there with my college orchestra, and anytime we had a day off, I would just go to some restaurant or coffee shop or something and just sit there almost all day, watch people. Might sound creepy, but it was interesting to watch people in a different country and how they walked, talked to each other, and behaved. I always found that fascinating. So I would imagine there's people that just come on here and listen to the conversations and find that interesting without feeling the need to contribute, which is fine. That may not have been me because I don't remember that. But yes, I'm going to be at the conference in May. I'll be in the tenting area. I used to be really uncomfortable starting conversations. I found that it's something kind of like jumping in a pool. You just kind of have to do it. Babelvis, yeah, bringing up the controversial topics. How do you feel about arresting former presidents and political opponents for petty crimes? Um, I'm glad that I would never be in a position to do it. I mean, it overall it seems petty. I feel like that's kind of the overwhelming um perception. I don't know. Yeah, it just seems really petty. It doesn't. I don't know anybody that seems to think it's very genuine. Um, it was funny listening to Chris Rock talk about it. Um, but yeah, I do feel like there is this obsession with like for people that are like very opposed to Donald Trump. There's like this obsession with trying to get him on something, which I don't understand. I do think it just fuels his cause, but we'll see what they do. I mean, I try to reserve judgment on such things until we see what happens. Yeah, and it's interesting because it's like the biggest thing that everybody, or especially in like mainstream media, like everybody's talking about, like, ooh. And I mean, at some point, it just kind of gets annoying. Like, I mean, I still remember the whole RussiaGate thing um, in early 2020, and it was just like you hear about it so much, and it's like I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but you know, I don't always like to be the one to say, yeah, this is definitely going to be blah blah blah, even though I suspect it's not going to go anywhere. Because then if it does, then it's like, oh, look at you, doofus. You said it wasn't going to go anywhere. Yeah, when it comes to a lot of that stuff, like so far, I feel like what I've been seeing is like a slow escalation, like people tiptoeing towards the edge, seeing what kind of buttons can be pushed. Um, and one of the things that seems to be the case, and again, I'm no expert on any of this, but it feels like there's not enough willpower to ever actually do anything about it, mainly because people are so comfortable with their own life situations. I mean, like you have some people that have talked like, oh, if Trump gets arrested, this could lead to civil war or something of that nature. I don't know that there is a significant amount of people that are interested in being part of that. There may be some people who like would like to see that happen. Um, but yeah, and right now I'm probably more concerned with my local election than anything else. Yeah, it really reminds me of if you ever, maybe if you've ever seen this in a movie or on the streets, where two guys start getting in each other's face and start fighting, and they'll like even be face to face, really close up, and they'll just be shouting and cursing at each other, circling. but it takes a long time for somebody to throw that first punch because neither is interested in losing a fight and or the damage done during a fight, and so they're kind of hoping and praying that the other side backs down. But yeah, I feel like we're in that kind of phase with the right and the left where some of these battles, if they escalate, they will have some real consequences. And I don't know that anybody is willing to risk those things as of yet. And sure, we might see later down the line, it may well be worth it. Like, well, we fought for something and we could have lost all these things. But I mean, we're seeing that a lot within the CRC and the potential split. There's a lot of people on the moderate that are just like, no, can't we just all get along? And it's like, well, there's some really severe ideological differences here. And if we stay together, I don't think we will get along. And that might be more problematic. But then, yeah, what does the separation end up looking like? I'm not super familiar with Nick Fuentes outside of what other people's third party. Well, I guess that would be the same for most things, but I haven't really looked into a lot of Nick Fuentes. I hear he's controversial. It's odd to me that he has the name Nick Fuentes, such a Latino name. And yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of Latinos with very extreme perspectives on both sides of things. I mean, the same would be true for almost any ethnicity. It's like if you were to come to my neighborhood and listen to some of the people out in the street talk about their political perspectives or their perspectives on anything, some of them might come off as like really extreme. That's just kind of the nature of people. And when they get into a bigger forum, the way that they talk about things might become less extreme. But he does hour-long monologues every day. Well, and it's interesting because I feel like there's a lot of people that do that. I mean, to a certain degree, that's kind of like a lot of what the Daily Wire puts out. Bill Burr, well, he has this podcast. He just goes on for forever. Some people are into that. I don't have the focus for that. Like, I can't even like watch Paul VanderKlay's stuff all the time, and I definitely don't watch all of it. Like, if I were to watch a Paul video, I don't watch all of it, just because my head is always in like 5 different spaces. It is interesting, the idea of political genius, because it seems like political goals are like different than they ought to be, maybe. Because it seems like most political goals are like winning office or winning an argument or something like that. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. They're trying to get both sides. Well, and what's the funny thing is, like, are there any neutral pundits these days? I don't know. Because I remember a lot of people used to tell me or try to claim that NPR was like a neutral voice. I mean, starting about like 15 years ago, I kind of became, I just had enough with NPR. I found them to be very annoying, mainly because of them trying to come off as if they were some kind of politically neutral voice, and I knew that they weren't. And I don't mind having conversations with people who think differently politically than me, but I would like them to at least be honest with themselves about where they're coming from. To a certain degree, I think that's what some people might find appeal with, like a Nick Fuentes or even a Donald Trump, is that they feel like, whether it's true or not, that they're at least saying what's on their mind. Yeah, I think to a certain degree, this might be what I'm getting at. Political genius is an insult because it's kind of like a manipulative genius. Like, and I don't know that I don't know I don't know that I would want to be described in that way. Or maybe not neutral, but like maybe a middle ground. But even that's tricky, right? Because some of the left has gone so far left that to be middle ground would likely be left. Um, so, but I find so many people wanting to take a middle path or claim to be neutral or something like that, and I don't know how realistic that is. Um, like when I first got married, I would describe my wife as left of center, close to center, and myself, I was right of center. Um, I think I'm fair. I don't think I've changed. I think I've come to realize that I'm pretty solidly on the right. Um, and I think my wife is probably still center left. But I think for her, at least in her mind, she had been more left and feels like she's come to be more center left now. Christian futurism. Hmm. I've never heard that term, but I'm intrigued by it. I might have to look into that a bit just to figure out what is meant by that term. That would be really awkward with Semi Charmed Kind of Life. Uh, to read through that with your mother. How did that go for you? I don't think I ever had to go through something like that with my parents, like going through lyrics. But I mean, music with explicit lyrics wasn't uncommon in my household. My parents had a very interesting way of trying to raise us because my parents were coming out of like a rougher life. I mean, my father was a former drug addict. He started getting clean like when I was born. Like, so even as a kid, as a young kid, he was still struggling with that. They had only become Christians like shortly before I was born, and so like they were trying. They had the street life kind of that they had been involved with for a long time, but then because they had become Christian, they were kind of consuming a lot of the evangelical stuff, like Focus on the Family, Dr. Dobson. So a lot of times they're trying to do the Dr. Dobson recommendations, but failing miserably at it. Yes, so these wooden shoes were a wedding gift. When I married my Dutch wife, her extended family went and got me these. They are my size. I have tried wearing them around the house before. They weren't very comfortable. Well, let's just say there were other people who did it way better than my parents. Like, for example, I've and again, I haven't really encountered Dr. Dobson personally. It was all like from my parents. They tried to give us rules about like what we could watch on TV, but my dad really wanted to watch his shows on TV, and since there was one TV, when he was home, we watched what he wanted to, which was all the things that we weren't supposed to watch. I guess to a certain degree, I could say I am Dutch because my wife and I are one flesh, so I'm half Dutch now. Um, but I do have half Dutch kids. They don't know much about Dutch dancing, though. I don't know that they have ever worn wooden shoes. I have taken them to the Dutch village in Holland, Michigan, which I thought was pretty cool. They had a great time. So technically, it is the constitutional monarchy of the wooden shoes, not the kingdom of the wooden shoes. Nederland. Yeah, I don't know a whole lot of Dutch words. Um, I know what is it? Angajo is like some kind of little cookie that I really like, and I don't always know how to pronounce some of these things. What is it? Burukuchen, butter cake. I like that too. I hear the Dutch are good with baked goods. Oliebollen is another one I've had. And then there's the other one. It's like oliebollen, but instead of the powdered sugar and raisins, they had like apple filling. I can't remember what they're called. Woohoo! Apfelkuchen. How would you pronounce? I guess Mofongo fan. So I don't dislike mofongo, but it's one of those things where you're like mofongo is something that, in my household at least, it was rarely ever made. It may have been made when like we had a guest or something like that. Um, but very rare. So in my house, I think I've had mofongo maybe once or twice. Um, if I've eaten it more often throughout my life at restaurants and at other people's, like other families' homes. Um, so yeah, it's mofongo is often thought of as like a Puerto Rican thing, and it is, but it's not as common to eat it at home as one might think. Arroz con gandules is probably a lot more common, just rice and pigeon peas, or even arroz con habichuela, just regular rice and beans. Although we would use uh, kidney beans, I think is more common. Kidney beans and pigeon peas are probably more common that we would have with rice. No, my wife is not very direct. But my wife is also third generation and Canadian and suburban. So, there's the Dutchness, but then it's also filtered through Canada, filtered through suburbia, and then you just have obviously watered downness that comes from living several generations away from that way of being. So to a certain degree, she's actually used to find it very uncomfortable with how direct I am. But I find that I actually connect more with like Dutch farmers within my denomination, um, because we're fairly direct. I really get annoyed with having like to beat around the bush. Um, yeah, which my wife used to. She is better at being direct now, but I would attribute that more to from her influence to me. She's from the suburbs of Toronto, like Oakville, I think is what it's called. Although, and then her, I can't remember where her, because her mom and her dad come from different places. Her mom came from a little bit south of there. They had a greenhouse. Um, and then the dad, my father-in-law, is actually from spent his early childhood in I think South Dakota, and then moved up to Edmonton. So my wife was actually born in Edmonton, but was only there for maybe the first year of her life. And it's also interesting how many people have come into my life from Edmonton. So even before I met my wife, my college roommate was from Edmonton. Um, and then when I started doing residential development, one of my larger investors was a Jamaican guy that lives down the street from me, but was raised and his family still lives in Edmonton. Hmm. Yeah, my wife's family in Canada came over during World War II, during or right after World War II. Not anymore. I don't have any family in Puerto Rico anymore. The my At least not that I know personally. I probably have some extended cousins, second cousins, and stuff like that. My mom has like a bunch of half brothers and sisters that she only met at my grandfather's funeral, and we don't have any relationship with them. My last aunt that lived in Puerto Rico, when her husband, my uncle, passed away, she moved to Florida to be closer to her kids. So I don't have any real connections there anymore. That's pretty cool. Yeah, it's been years since I've been up that way, but that part of Canada just feels like one big suburb to me. Hey, Tayo, how are you? Yeah, the interesting about Puerto Rico these days, I I haven't looked into this directly, but it seems to me like there's probably more Puerto Ricans here on the mainland than there are in Puerto Rico. Um, yeah, and so I don't have to. I haven't since my aunt moved to Florida. I've never haven't had a real desire to go to Puerto Rico. Um, my wife wants to go. She wants to take the kids, but I only went there once when I was a baby for my great grandmother's funeral. But I don't have any memory of that, and I had never been back since. So I don't have like any kind of strong affinity or connection there. Um, her Dutch name is Holar or Holler. They go by Holler. I'm told it's supposed to be pronounced Holar, um, which I really toyed with the idea of taking her name, her last name. So at the time, I was still a musician in the hip hop scene. And could you imagine that as a stage name, Mo Holla? That and that was like the whole "holla back, y'all." That phrase was very common in the slang. Yeah, so yeah, Central Florida. So I've known a lot of Puerto Ricans, especially in recent years, that have moved that way. I've had family in Orlando and in Kissimmee for a long time uh, that went there in the mid 2000s. But with the whole COVID thing, I've had a lot of Puerto Rican friends and family that have moved to Central Florida. Seem to be happy there. Yeah, and let's see. That obviously comes from her father's side of the family, who who would have come to the states because her father's family, uh, born in South Dakota. Um, and so my grandfather-in-law is the one. He moved up to Canada when my father-in-law was younger, but they probably would have been in the states for a long time. That family. So I wonder if there was any anglicizing of the name, maybe. I don't know. You have to call me.
You gotta make me change my mind. I don't want no one to squeeze me. They might take away my life. I don't want no one to squeeze me. They might take away my life.
I was a guitarist. So yeah, Grim has asked me if I would be down. I'm not taking my guitar with, but Grim mentioned the possibility of visiting a pawn shop and just grabbing a couple guitars for Chad and me. So yeah, I would definitely be down to jam and have a good time there. But I also was a music teacher, so I've played drums before, um, trombone. I've done a few things, but I actually have a degree in classical guitar, and so that was my main instrument. Although I hardly ever play since college, I've hardly played classical guitar. That does remind me. I've been meaning to invite some people to that May event. I keep forgetting to send them the invitations. Yes, as a music major, I would have had to. Um, so I had to study a bit of the Baroque period. I was a music teacher, so I also had to teach that. Wouldn't say it's my favorite of like classical music in general. Obviously, people use the term classical to refer to all of it and not just the classical period of music. Um, yeah, I wasn't super fond. Vivaldi. Obviously, a lot of people like him, and you know, but yeah, that's not my favorite to like listen to while I relax or background music. Yeah, I find that a lot of classical piano players struggle with some of the rhythm-based aspects of the music, which was always weird for me because I always struggled with the classical parts of the music. The rhythmic stuff seemed easier for me, and even Handel was a great Handel, and then why am I Haydn? Haydn was also really great too of that period. But I really get fascinated watching the the classical transition from Baroque to Romantic period. I always thought that was really cool. It is a different skill set. It has an easier learning curve though with the blues, because with the blues you can take three chords, your 1, 4, and 5, and learn a 12 bar blues just playing it, and then you just sit with that for a while, with kind of a swing rhythm, and whereas classical, there's a pretty high bar of entry to learn to play classical music. That's interesting. When I used to teach music, that was one of the movies I would play for my students. I would obviously have to edit some parts out. Um, but yeah, that was a very interesting music, and I feel like the way that they conceptualize some of the writing of music, especially for somebody who has so much music in their head, I felt was pretty good. Blues is also a great entry into like every other kind of like pop music because you get to learn that 1-4-5, and then there's like 1,000 rock songs that have that 1-4-5 or that kind of 12-bar blues progression. Um, and then the pentatonic scale, the 5 notes, especially the minor pentatonic, you start learning how to just play around with that a bit. It really opens the door because all then when you get to like rock or other more modern styles is you maybe add the 6 chord, the relative minor, and again you just go from there. That was a great movie. The only thing I didn't like about the movie is that he conducted left-handed, which is a thing, but it is very rare. Um, but I really liked that movie for just kind of how it showed that sometimes the work that you do while feeling like a failure is probably more important than the work you're trying to do initially. There's also a movie I would show to my students when I was teaching music. And no, we didn't just watch movies every day in music class. What was the name of the band? Amadeus or Mr. Allen's Opus? Hmm. Yeah, I haven't kept up with a whole lot of modern performances of older music. Oh, Pentatonics. Yeah, Pentatonics. That is a band name, but it's a riff on the pentatonic scale, which obviously penta. There's only 5 notes in the scale, and so if you take like your C major or any major scale and you remove what is it? You remove the 4th and the 7th. That's your major pentatonic scale. Um, and a lot of country music soloing or riffing or folk music is based around that major pentatonic scale. A lot of blues is around the minor version of that scale, which I think is still removing the 4th and the 7ths, but of the natural minor scale. It is interesting how important classical singing, especially in terms of technique, like learning that it's so helpful in just regular singing. You think of guys like what's his name? I think it was Sebastian Bach, not the Johann Sebastian, not the composer, but what band was he a part of? It was an '80s hair metal band. But he was a very studied classical music singer before he started doing '80s metal. Um, but learning those classical techniques is remarkably helpful for even pop music. I mean, and I found that learning classical guitar really helped me in the dexterity of my fingers and also knowledge of the fretboard when it came to playing guitar. So although I didn't use a whole lot of classical guitar when I performed, practicing it um, opened the doors for a lot of creative ways of playing when I did perform pop music. Skid Row, yes, that was the name. That was the name of the band. But yeah, he has a classical singing background, and there's several other well-known singers that have a bit of a classical singing background that has helped form their pop singing, which makes sense because the whole idea behind singing classical music is learning how to mimic other people's styles, and you do it so often and then eventually you kind of can learn to develop your own. Yes, I would agree with that. I like the idea of classical combining with everything. Like Jay Z did a concert with uh, uh, an orchestra behind. It wasn't a full orchestra, but a lot of orchestration behind him. I love the idea of like hip hop with an orchestra. The Metallica album was it S&M, San Francisco Orchestra with or Symphony with plus Metallica. That was a great album. Singing in a cathedral is awesome. Like I always thought that was weird until I did it. I led a mass, the music for a mass, excuse me, at Rockefeller Chapel at University of Chicago, which is beautiful. And I was a choir director, and oh man, singing there, especially in a classical style, like choral hymns and stuff like that, is really beautiful. I might have to check that out. I haven't heard the Kiss stuff yet. I might have I have to check that out. I didn't realize that they had done that. But even Coolio has a song called "I'll See You When You Get There" that includes an orchestration background of Pachelbel's Canon in D. I always thought that was super cool. I actually did a show once where with my old band where I hired a string quartet and I wrote string parts for all of our songs. That was an amazing show. I was so upset when we didn't get it recorded. And we tried to record it, but something went wrong with the recorder. And then the band broke up, so we never got to try it again. But I've always wanted to try to do something with like a hip hop band and an orchestra together. I always felt that would be super cool. That's pretty cool. Trace 1974. I'm gonna have to look that up. Yeah, it's one difficult thing about what today's world is that there is so much music out there and available to consume that it's really hard to keep up with it all, both old and new. That's why when I listen to Pandora, I typically just go to my 90s station for that bit of nostalgia. Yes, very, very much so. Things are. I, I mean, I remember, if we really wanted a song, because we weren't always allowed to buy music, you'd have your little tape and then wait for your song to come on, and then you have to hit record real fast. We have all these mixed tapes that had like, the radio DJ talking on the beginning of the song. Yep. I think I may, because when I was a teenager, that's when CDs were like really blowing up. And so I did make one mixtape for my high school girlfriend before tapes kind of became obsolete. I don't even know what that means. What am I doing alone? I'm at home in my home office. Other people that are just not here. You know, I used to watch Rick Beato a bit. I like especially some of his countdowns. He's quite a bit more solidly in the music scene. So sometimes I feel like I don't his the way that he talks about things feels like an exaggeration to me, but he's like more in the thick of it than I am. So it's a bit more real for him than it is for me. But I do think there is a lot of potential for a kind of renaissance in local music because it's so overwhelming trying to keep up with the mainstream. Actually, I'm trying to raise money to buy a bar on my corner. Not only is that being utilized by a lot of the drug dealers, but when I first moved on my street, that was a blues bar, and all weekend long, it's like 2 in the morning, you could hear live music coming from there. And so I would like to buy it and turn it back into maybe not a blues bar, but where local musicians can come and jam and people can come hear them. I'm not familiar with Parcels. What genre are they would they fall into? So I was a bit of a Jamiroquai fan, so I might have to check them out. I do find that I tend to enjoy a lot of like local music, um, especially these days. Yeah, Sister Hazel. I believe they're a Canadian group. Actually, this song was actually on the mixtape I made for my girlfriend in high school. She broke up with me like a week later. I don't think it was because of the song. I think she might have given it an additional week because of this song. I don't know the Guffs. Oh yeah, man, Dispatch. I was a Dispatch fan. I thought they were really creative. And of course, so Dave Matthews Band, when they first became popular, I hated them mainly because other people liked them. But when I saw the DVD listener supported of their concert, it like blew me away, and I've been a fan ever since. Most of it, most mainstream music is barren of melody and all that stuff. There are a few that kind of pierce through, and you get some good stuff here and there. But it's rare. But part of that is because of the need to sell en masse. So it's not necessarily record labels aren't interested in putting the most interesting music out there. They're interested in what kids will spend the most money on. And so that kind of really dumbs things down because, well, what has mass appeal? Well, four chords has mass appeal. A basic melody has mass appeal. But every now and then something pierces through. I'm trying to think of something recently, but I haven't listened to a ton recently. Well, I would say like Louis Capaldi had a couple of singles that I thought were really. I mean, they still followed the four chord progression, but the way that he sang with passion, I thought was cool. But then every song that has kind of come out from him, or at least that has made it onto the radio, has been exactly the same as that song. So radio kind of kills that a bit. Yeah, I haven't kept track with DMB and their newer stuff. Um, what was the last American Girl? Was that what it was called? American Lady. It was an album that came out, I think, in 2006 or 7. It was probably the last new stuff. No, there was a song that came out not too long ago. They performed at the Grammys called "You and Me," "You and Me Together," something like that. I really love that performance at the Grammys of it. I don't know necessarily that pop songs are hard to write. It's more that there is so much competition for the spotlight, and there's so many of them that sound the same or similar that being able to get into the mainstream or into the pop scene, it could be said that it requires a lot more luck than talent. Um, but so it's very hard to get in, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily hard to create the song that gets you in. At least that's my humble opinion. Wait, what happened to my music? You disagree that it's about it being hard to write the song? Or, yeah, what part do you disagree with? Well, I mean, that's kind of what I was saying is part of the problem is that everyone is doing it, and that's why it's hard to pierce, is because you're not just competing with a few people, you're competing with huge, vast amounts of people, new people entering the scene that know their four basic chords, plus all the old people that were doing it. So it's more. I think it's more about a saturated scene than anything else. But I would say, yeah. I mean, maybe. I mean, I might have to think about that more. Because I think we had one song in my band that made it to radio play, and it was probably the most simple song that we ever made. But that was the one that made it. That was just a simple dance song. I don't know Josh Turner, or at least doesn't. I couldn't describe him, or Carson McGee. I'm not familiar with them. Chad, are you familiar with the song "Hook" by Blues Traveler? That's another song that I from the '90s that I really love. Somebody knew that somebody introduced me to somebody actually from this little corner is Ren. I've only listened to a couple things. It's been pretty cool, but I had never heard of Ren before, like last week. I've always felt that Blues Traveler was a bit of an underrated band. They were probably a little bit more poppy than Dave Matthews Band, because they kind of came up around the same time. But they were really good and really creative. What was the Ren one? I'm looking for it right now. Here we go. Share, copy. So I just came across this song by Ren, which I thought was super cool. The guy who sent it to me said he thinks Paul Vanderklay should do a reaction video to it. No, not Rem or REM. Ren, spelled REN. And so I just shared the link for one of his videos. I never had a whole lot of patience to listen to Baroque music for an extended period of time. I mean, there's a few. I mean, similar with classical music, especially when you get, or even the Romantic era, where the pieces just get longer. Yeah, but that might be a flaw in me, sitting still for that long. I did do a period, what was it, maybe several years ago, where I gave up listening to pop music on the radio in my car for Lent. And so I kept the radio on a classical music station. And I do feel like it limited my road rage quite a bit. There is a lot of bad stuff that came out of the Romantic period. It's kind of like pop music in that way. But there were some really beautiful pieces and compositions in that period. I mean, several of Beethoven's stuff. I mean, obviously he's probably the most popular, but there's some really great pieces, like where the idea of trying to communicate an emotion musically, I felt like was explored quite a bit. But the pieces were just way too long. I don't have time to sit down and listen to all those super long pieces. Yeah, and to come to think of it, I don't think I've ever listened to radio in another country before. By the time I traveled overseas for the first time, um, iPods were already a thing. So I didn't really listen to any radios. If I listened to anything, it was whatever was on my iPod. Let's see, which ones were those? That was Carson McGee and Josh Turner. Oh yeah, and then Chad had introduced me to, I forget the first name, Gome. Really cool guitarist. What was his first name? John Gome. Yeah, super creative. I thought that was really cool. I watched some of his stuff last week. Thought that was super cool. Yeah, that's one thing I feel like can be a struggle is for somebody to be able to be technically talented and also write great songs that kind of appeal to the masses. I mean, I always think of like Steve Vai, amazing guitarist. I never have a desire to listen to his music. Um, if it comes on, I'm like, wow, that is really cool playing, and I don't like the song at all. But to be able to combine that technical skill on a high level and then also write a great song that's both appealing and maybe deep on some level, it's hard to do. And so certainly that's why I really liked Dave Matthews Band, because they would do some very technically challenging stuff, especially the drummer and even Dave, which approached rhythm guitar in a very unique way. But they come together very well. Tina S. I am not familiar with Tina S. at all. I do feel like there's been a lot more of like creative guitar players these days. Like I think of like 20 years ago, Tommy Emmanuel was doing a lot of the tap and drumming on the guitar, and I feel like that's become fairly common these days. Yeah, lots of bluegrass is technically amazing, and they because what they do a lot is just arpeggios, fast arpeggiating, which is easy when you have like a decent. I wouldn't say easy, but if you just train your fingers to do a pattern, a lot of it is just then moving chords while your right hand is doing the same pattern. I've never been particularly great at bluegrass. Um, I've played in a couple of groups where we did bluegrass music, but it was a struggle just because the rhythms are different. And so I find myself wanting to fall into different rhythmic patterns than what are common in bluegrass. After what? Who did to Chicago? Smashing Pumpkins was a great group. The kids always freak out when I'm in the car driving, and what's the song? Bullet for Butterfly Wings. Right? No, is that the name of it? But despite all my rage, I'm still just a rat in a cage. I can't have that song play without raising it up really loud and getting into it. Freaks out my kids sometimes. I just pulled up some of the videos on YouTube. I'll probably watch some of them later. You guys are giving me so much stuff that I'm gonna have to check out now. It's gonna be tricky. Well, people of Chicago have been dumping bodies in that Chicago River for a long time, so It's par for the course. But actually, so I did get kicked out of a Dave Matthews Band when they played in Chicago, one of their concerts at Soldier Field. Um, Apparently, the tickets that we had were stolen. A guy from my church had gotten a bunch of DMB tickets from his brother-in-law, and when we got to the stadium, we found out that the tickets were stolen. And when he called his brother-in-law, he was like, "Hey man, did you know these tickets were stolen?" And his brother-in-law was like, "Yeah man, we took all that guy's shit." But it sucked getting thrown out of a Dave Matthews concert. We got thrown out like before Dave even came on stage. So I've actually never seen Dave Matthews live, even though I went to a concert at Soldier Field. Did they play at all, or was it evacuated before the music started? Uh-oh. Dave just came on my Pandora randomly. Sure. I am a pretty big Eminem fan. Maybe not necessarily do I think he's like a great guy, but just the creativity he brings, not just with his rhymes and the poetry aspect of it, but with his flow, his rhythmic. He's very creative with his rhythms. What was the I am whatever you say I am. That whole song, his whole rhyme scheme is da 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 da. That's super cool. I mean, and he was doing things on his albums with rhymes and rhythms that only like indie rappers were doing. Uh, so yeah, I was a huge Eminem fan, and just the way that he's able to describe certain emotions that I think, especially if you're from a rougher context, like what is it in the lose yourself song, that third verse when it comes out, I'm gonna change how you define what is it, how you I'm gonna change what you call rage, tear this mother roof off like two dogs cage. I was playing in the beginning of the movie, man, that is so intense. um yeah, and yeah, as he's gotten older, I mean, he hasn't lost it. um yeah, the creativity, especially even when he talks about like parenthood. I mean, you can tell it's obviously very dysfunctional, but if you come from a dysfunctional environment, you're like, yeah, I know what that's like. Um, there was a few other ones. Airplanes. What's by B.O.B. and the girl from Paramore? I forget her name. But he and this. There's a second version where M comes on the last verse, and he talks about like imagine if life was different, imagine if I didn't do all these things, imagine if I just went outside and played with my friends, and it sounds kind of peaceful, and then he flips it right away to imagine if I even had a friend to begin with, and then he goes on this whole like kind of rampage about like what that's like and not being understood. Man, really talented, but technically talented, then also able to do something that has kind of mass appeal. I cannot, at least not at the moment. Maybe I'll learn that, and next time we do a live stream, I will sing it. I'll start by singing it, if that would please you. So yes, but man, it's been a long time. Like I haven't even heard Coheed and Cambria, that those words together, for a very, very long time. How would I pronounce that? Erzich gut? I can imagine. I wonder if my kids would just naturally respond because they're also part Dutch. All right, guys, I got about 5 minutes left. So just giving you a heads up. 5 minutes and I have to go to a Zoom meeting. Thanks, Chad. You have a great day too. Does anybody remember the Hot Stepper? Hey, Gavin. Any interest in taking over? Pig talked about wanting to come on later if it kept going for about 5 hours. Classic. Well, I got 3 more minutes, so can you take over in 3 minutes? Lame. Just have the AI do it for you. All right, let's see what time is it. 55. All right, y'all. I got to roll. I got to use the bathroom before my meeting. I will see you guys in the future. Peace.